Marcus, what have you done?
I am cleansing the soil.
I remember the smell first, not his face, not his eyes, not even the sound of the auctioneer's voice cracking in that big room. What has stayed with me is the smell of that morning in Charleston, salt from the harbor, old wood and mildew from the rafters, sweat pressed into the boards, from 1,000 frightened bodies that had stood where he was standing. It was March 15th, 1849, the day I bought the man everyone else in that room already knew better than to touch. I told myself I was there as a businesswoman, a widow with 3,000 acres of tired cotton land, a line of creditors breathing down her neck, and a house full of enslaved people whose work she did not yet understand how to direct. That is how I rehearsed it in my mind as the carriage wheels rattled over Charleston's cobblestones. I was not a grieving wife. I was not a frightened woman who had never signed a ledger in her life before my husband's heart stopped in his study 6 months earlier. I was a Harrington, and I would not be the one who lost Oak Haven after 3 generations. That is what I told myself. But when I stepped into the auction house with its high-stained ceiling and rows of benches that borrowed courage collapsed into something brittle. The place felt like a church built for a God I did not believe in, a God of profit and flesh. Men were already seated along the front rows, planters and traders I recognized from dinners and summer visits to town. Their hats in their laps, their eyes sharp and practiced. Behind them, in a long holding pen that stank of fear and unwashed skin, stood the people for sale. I had seen auctions before. William used to bring me when he wanted to flatter me with the idea that my opinion mattered. "You've a good eye for strength," he would say, as if we were choosing horses. But I had never come alone, never walked in with my own money and my reticule and my own signature ready to be placed at the bottom of a bill of sale. My palms were damp inside my gloves. I took a seat near the middle where I could see without being seen. The auctioneer, Mr. Jarvis, climbed to his platform and began the day's work. Lots came and went. A girl no older than 14 sold with a baby on her hip, a pair of brothers whose tied hands could not keep them from being separated by bids. A carpenter with scars across his back that told more truth than the auctioneer's promises about docility. The numbers rose and fell, paddles lifted, the clerk scratched in his ledger. I watched it all with a thin veil drawn over my thoughts, pretending this was no more than a necessary transaction to save my land. Then he stepped onto the block. I had already heard his name murmured that morning, though I did not realize it until later. Bits of conversation floated through the humid air. That one again. Fool who takes him on 13 graves. At the time, I did not fasten those fragments to anything in particular. There were always stories in Charleston, tales of cursed lots and troublesome hands. Men loved their ghost stories almost as much as their profits. I prided myself on being above such superstition. But when he walked out, the room changed. He was taller than any man there, well over 6 feet, his shoulders broad beneath the rough shirt they had given him. Muscles corded along his arms and chest with the unmistakable look of long, hard work. His skin was a light brown, neither the deep darkness of many field hands, nor the pale shade of some mixed servants I had seen in parlors. There was a foreignness to him, a refinement in the way he held himself even with iron around his wrists, that made me think of the island stories whispered over brandy. Haiti, revolt, blood. The auctioneer boomed his name as if announcing a prize animal. Lot 72, gentlemen, Marcus Beaumont, age 25, sound, strong, trained in field labor and household service. You won't find better this season. Marcus lifted his head then, and his eyes swept the room. Amber, Not simply brown, not hazel, but that molten, honey-colored amber that catches the light and holds it. They were beautiful eyes if one were inclined to call anything about that scene beautiful. But there was something else in them, something I could not name that morning. It was not defiance nor submission. It was as if he were measuring us, as if the chains on his wrists had nothing to do with the height from which he seemed to look down on the room. In any other auction, a man like that would have caused a small war in the front rows. Planters who wanted handsome house servants or impressive carriage drivers would have elbowed each other, calling out higher and higher numbers just to claim him. And there were others, the ones no polite lady was supposed to acknowledge, who trafficked in flesh for more private uses, who prized beauty the way collectors prized ivory or fine wine. I knew all this. I had seen it. But on that morning when Marcus stepped onto the block, the room went silent. Not the normal pause while men calculated value. This was a different kind of stillness, heavy and absolute. It was as if the air had thickened. I watched the faces in the front row, Jarvis with his practiced smile beginning to falter, traders suddenly intent on their boots, planters looking everywhere but at the man on the platform. Someone coughed. Someone else muttered a curse under his breath. "Opening bid, $2,000, Jarvis called, voice too loud in the quiet. No one moved. I saw men who would have paid that amount for a team of mules without blinking, who had already bid that much that morning for a skilled carpenter or seamstress. Their hands remained still in their laps. One man, Mitchell, an old trader whose word carried weight in Charleston, actually shifted back on his bench as if distance itself could protect him. "Gentlemen, perhaps you didn't hear me," Jarvis tried again. "2,000 to open, you won't find better." Still nothing. A woman somewhere behind me whispered, "Not worth it at any price," and another voice answered, "You don't pay coin to dig your own grave." My rational mind scoffed. Men loved their drama. Yet the unease remained. Marcus stood very still on the platform, his hands at his sides, his gaze moving slowly from face to face. When his eyes passed over me, I felt it like the brief touch of a hand along my spine, and I looked down quickly, angry at myself for reacting at all. 1,800, Jarvis pushed. 1,005, one. With each lowering of the number, the silence grew heavier. Packed with fear, I refused to name as wisdom. The murmurs thickened. Cursed property. Death follows him. 13 owners. I remember thinking with a kind of cool contempt that men who ruled thousands of acres and hundreds of lives were letting children's tales keep them from a bargain. 500, Jarvis said at last, sweat beading along his hairline. $500. I will not go lower. Somebody had better find his courage. In the moment before I raised my hand, I hesitated. Not because I believed in curses, not because of the talk of graves. I hesitated because every other person in that room refused what seemed, on paper, an extraordinary purchase. I had watched William long enough to know that when every experienced buyer walks away from something, there is usually a reason. But pride is its own poison. I could feel the eyes of those men on the back of my neck, the ones who had spoken gently to me in drawing rooms, praising my bravery in trying to manage Oak Haven alone, already wondering how soon my land would come up for sale. I heard my own inner voice, sharpened by 6 months of humiliation. You are not a fool. You are not a helpless woman. You are rational. You are brave. My hand lifted. I'll take him, I heard myself say. My voice sounded small in that high-ceilinged room. 500. The sound that followed was not applause nor the mutter of competing bids. It was a collective intake of breath, sharp and disbelieving. Someone actually whispered, "Poor woman," as if I had just signed my own death warrant. The clerk's pen scratched across the paper. Jarvis's relief was almost indecent as he slammed his gavel down. "Sold," he declared, "to Mrs. Catherine Harrington of Oak Haven Plantation." For a heartbeat, Marcus's eyes met mine again. There was no gratitude in them, no hatred either, only a quiet recognition, as if he had been waiting for me, as if he had known all along that when every other man in that room refused him, some desperate, proud widow would step forward and claim what they knew better than to touch. I smiled tightly, signed my name, and walked out into the bright Charleston sunlight with the most beautiful man in the auction house chained behind my carriage. I did not yet understand that I had just bought my own murderer. When I returned to Oak Haven 2 days later, the house did not feel like home. The familiar white columns rising from the porch, the ancient oaks draped in moss, even the long gravel road that led to the front steps, all of it seemed older, more exhausted than when I had left. The land was sick, and I had been pretending not to see the symptoms. From the porch I could already smell the soil, flat and tired. For years William had pushed it to its limit, planting cotton over and over until the ground itself seemed to sigh with every new season. He had been one of those men who believed more acreage and more lashes could fix anything. When his heart failed that September, he left behind not wealth, but a mountain of debt hidden behind polite silence. I had been 38 then, a widow without sons, a woman educated just enough to write her own letters and balance a household ledger. Oak Haven was supposed to be safe, 3,000 acres of inheritance, 20 rooms, and 80 enslaved souls whose labor defined our comfort. But within a few months of his death, the overseer resigned, the cotton prices wavered, and the creditors began to whisper. Everyone assumed I would sell. That is what widows were expected to do, marry again or relinquish control. Yet pride has a strange way of masquerading as courage. I told myself that rationality would save me, that numbers and reason could outmatch superstition and gossip. I told myself I would learn to run this plantation the way men did, by calculation and will. That was the woman who went to Charleston, the woman who bought Marcus Beaumont. When the carriage reached the yard, I stepped out before the driver could help me. The air was thick with spring heat, already humming with insects. Behind the carriage, Marcus climbed down slowly. Even the chains around his wrists could not make him appear diminished. The house servants had gathered to watch. I saw their faces change the moment they saw him. It was not curiosity. It was fear. They exchanged quick glances, murmuring to each other in the low rhythmic tones of a language I did not understand. I caught the name Obeah whispered like a breath, but I dismissed it as foolishness. I had heard that word before in the stories told by William's field hands, tales of charms and spirits, of conjure bags buried under doorsteps. Such nonsense belonged to the world of the uneducated, not to mine. "Unchain him," I told the driver. "He will not try to run." Marcus's eyes flickered briefly toward me, unreadable, before the man obeyed. The irons fell away with a dull clank. I expected some display of gratitude, but he simply rubbed his wrists and looked out toward the horizon, as if measuring the distance to the farthest field. "This is Oak Haven," I said, forcing brightness into my voice. "You will find it different from Charleston. I expect order and diligence here." "Yes, ma'am," he said. His tone was respectful, but there was no submission in it, only calm acknowledgement, the kind that unsettles because it carries no fear. I assigned him temporary quarters near the old overseer's house. That night, as candles burned low in the parlor, I tried to convince myself I had made a sound decision. The numbers were clear. $500 for a skilled laborer capable of management, perhaps accounting. Even if the rumors were true that his previous owners had died under mysterious circumstances, such tales could be explained by coincidence or poor health. People died every day of fevers and heart failure. Only the ignorant sought ghosts in every grave. I spent that night at my desk writing letters to creditors and adjusting figures. Every column bled red. Yet beneath the arithmetic, another unease crept in. I kept remembering the stillness of that auction house, the way even hardened traders had refused to bid. I told myself it was superstition, but the image clung to me like humidity. The next morning I woke before dawn to the faint sound of singing. At first I thought it was the wind through the cypress trees, then I realized the melody came from the fields. Soft, low voices rising in a language I didn't know. It was a morning sound, and for reasons I could not explain, it filled me with guilt. At breakfast I asked Hannah, my housemaid, about it. She was a small woman with eyes that had seen too much. "They sing for protection, ma'am," she said quietly. "New spirit come to Oak Haven last night. Gotta keep the others safe." I frowned. "A new spirit? Do you mean Marcus?" She looked away, her hands tightening around the silver tray. "Some say he walk with old gods, ma'am. Say his eyes see what we can't. Folks in the quarter scared. Tell them there's nothing to fear," I said, sharper than I intended. "He's a man, not a spirit, and this house will have no talk of heathen charms." Hannah's voice dropped to a whisper. "Beg pardon, ma'am. But sometimes men and spirits share the same skin." I waved her off, irritated more by my own discomfort than by her words. Rational women did not bow to such foolishness. I told myself the workers would adjust, that fear would fade once Marcus proved himself useful. Within a week, he had. He began by inspecting the irrigation ditches, walking each line with a precision that surprised me. He spoke little but observed everything: the slope of the fields, the texture of the soil, the rot in the storage sheds. When he made suggestions, they were intelligent, almost scientific. He recommended rotating corn and cotton to restore nutrients, using crushed shells from the riverbank to enrich the earth. I found myself impressed, even grateful. For the first time since William's death, Oak Haven felt as if it might live again. He organized the workers differently, too. Where the previous overseer had ruled with the whip, Marcus relied on quiet authority. I watched from the veranda as the field hands obeyed him without hesitation, though none met his gaze directly. They moved around him like shadows around a flame, drawn, yet cautious. At dinner, I asked him about his background. He told me he had learned about crops and accounts from previous owners. His tone was polite but careful, offering fragments and omissions that invited no further inquiry. I pressed once, "Where were you born?" And he paused before answering. "Haiti, ma'am. Long time ago." Something in the way he said it made the room colder. I remembered the old stories of the Haitian revolt, of plantations burned and masters slaughtered in their sleep. But I smiled as though his birthplace were a trivial curiosity. "How interesting," I said. "And you were brought here as a boy?" "Yes, ma'am," he replied, looking down at his hands. "As a boy." He said nothing more. That night I could not sleep. My mind kept returning to that single word, Haiti, and to the odd resonance it carried, a place whispered about but rarely understood. I told myself again that none of it mattered. A woman who let her imagination rule her would lose both reason and property. By May, the plantation had begun to change. The fields grew greener, the rows straighter, yields promised to double. The other planters started visiting, curious about my success. They called it the widow's miracle, unaware that I felt less like a savior and more like a spectator watching events beyond my comprehension. And yet, I was proud. When Marcus delivered his weekly reports in that calm, precise manner of his, I felt an irrational warmth, a sense of being seen as capable. Perhaps it was loneliness, perhaps something subtler. There were moments, brief, disquieting moments, when his eyes lingered on me longer than propriety allowed. not boldly but with the faintest trace of recognition, as if we shared a secret neither of us had spoken. Each time I looked away first. The household noticed. Servants became quieter when he entered a room. I began hearing the rustle of whispered prayers, the faint smell of burnt sage along doorways. When I asked Hannah, she lied poorly, saying she was keeping the air sweet. One evening, as I walked past the quarter, I saw a small circle of women kneeling in the dirt, drawing signs with chalk. At the center burned a bowl of herbs, sending up a smoke that shimmered blue in the dusk. Marcus stood apart from them, arms folded, watching. The women turned their faces away when they saw me. He did not. "What is this?" I demanded. "A blessing," he said evenly, "for the harvest. See that it stops," I told him. "We don't practice heathen magic here." He inclined his head. "As you wish, ma'am." But the next morning I found a charm tucked beneath my doorstep, 3 feathers bound with red thread. Chill crushed it under my heel, though a chill ran through me as I did so. Weeks later, the symptoms began. At first it was fatigue, the kind that makes daylight feel too heavy. Then came the headaches, sharp behind the eyes. I blamed the heat, the endless work. I told myself every widow suffers some frailty when she takes on a man's burdens. But the dreams were harder to explain. In them I walked through the cotton fields under a sky that pulsed like a heartbeat. Marcus stood at the far edge, waiting. When I reached him, he would touch my wrist and say words I did not understand. Then I would wake with the taste of metal on my tongue. I said nothing to anyone. By July, I had convinced myself that these were signs of exhaustion, nothing more. Logic would prevail. Yet sometimes when I passed Marcus in the hall and caught the faint, sweet, bitter scent of the herbs he carried, the rational world I clung to felt thin as paper. Still, I told myself, I had made the right choice. I was not some frightened girl swayed by gossip. I was Catherine Harrington, mistress of Oak Haven, a woman of reason. And reason, I thought, would save me. I could not yet see that reason would be the very thing that killed me. It began so quietly that at first I didn't even think of calling it an illness. In April, I told myself I was merely tired from the spring harvest accounts. In May, I blamed the damp heat that crept through the house no matter how many windows I opened. By June, when the dull ache in my chest woke me at night, I whispered the excuse every widow whispers, it is only loneliness. But something in my body was changing, and though I would not admit it, I knew when it started. It was the morning Marcus began preparing my tea. Before his arrival, Hannah had always brought me breakfast. One morning she appeared at the door, wringing her hands. "Mr. Marcus say he'll fix it, ma'am," she said. "He say he knows herbs for the nerves." I remember the faint hesitation in her voice, the way her eyes flicked toward the doorway as if expecting him to appear. I had been sitting at my desk, half dizzy from lack of sleep. The thought of a servant taking initiative comforted me. "Very well," I said. "Let him." When Marcus came in, he carried a tray of porcelain cups and a small pot that smelled faintly of almond and crushed flowers. "This will help you rest, ma'am," he said. "Oleander for the heart, mint for the mind." I had never heard of oleander as a medicine. I only knew it as a common garden shrub, its pink blossoms bright against the fences. "You know of herbs, then?" I asked. He nodded. "My mother was a healer. In my country, we treat body and spirit together. You will sleep better tonight." I drank without question. The tea was bitter with a sweetness that lingered. I remember the warmth spreading through me, the sudden lightness in my head, and the strange clarity that followed. That night I slept for the first time in weeks. When I awoke, I thought perhaps I had dreamt his voice, yet the next morning he appeared again with the tray. You rested, ma'am? Yes, I said, too grateful to question. You may continue bringing it. From that morning on, the ritual became fixed. Marcus brewed, I drank. The flavor never changed, but the dreams that came afterward began to take on color and sound more vivid than any waking moment. In those dreams, the plantation shimmered beneath a dark, throbbing sky. I walked barefoot through wet earth, the cotton bending toward me as though listening. Marcus was always there, at first a shadow, later a man standing beneath the twisted oak near the field's edge. He would lift his hand, whisper words that made the ground tremble. And then light would burst behind my eyes, filling me with an aching mixture of dread and pleasure. I would wake breathless, my pulse hammering. Each morning he asked, "You slept well?" And each morning I lied, "Yes, thank you." I began to notice the small things. The way the air in my room seemed heavier after he entered, as though the walls themselves bent closer to listen. The way my skin prickled when he stood behind me, pouring tea or setting down papers. Sometimes I would find him already watching from the doorway, silent as if waiting for permission to speak. His expression never changed, calm, polite. But those amber eyes burned with something I could not name. The others noticed too. One afternoon, as I was walking through the orchard, I heard soft footsteps behind me. It was Hannah again. "Begging pardon, ma'am," she said, "but maybe you best not drink from his pot no more." I turned sharply. "What are you suggesting?" She shook her head quickly. "Not suggesting, ma'am, just remembering. My grandmama say in the islands, a man who stirs a woman's cup can stir her spirit too. Folks talk, ma'am. They say he got tricks." I laughed, though the sound came out brittle. "Do you think I'm a child, Hannah? Do you imagine I can be bewitched by a cup of tea?" She didn't answer. She simply lowered her eyes and stepped back. That night I found a small cloth bundle tucked under my pillow, a charm of bones and sage wrapped in twine. I burned it in the fireplace, angry that my own servants had begun to treat me like a fool. But by midsummer the fatigue had become impossible to ignore. My heartbeat fluttered like a trapped bird, my thoughts blurred at odd moments. When I rode out to inspect the fields, the sunlight made my vision swim. Marcus insisted I rest. "You push yourself too hard," he said one afternoon as I swayed on the veranda. "You should let me handle the accounts and the field schedules. You hired me for that." It was true. His records were immaculate, rows of numbers written in a steady hand, every bale accounted for. He seemed to anticipate my needs before I spoke them. The plantation was thriving, again, though I could scarcely summon the strength to enjoy it. At night he brought the tea. Always the tea. Sometimes he lingered by the window while I drank, his eyes following the wind that moved through the curtains. "Do you hear them, ma'am?" he asked once. "Hear what?" "The spirits that live in the trees. They sing when storms come." I told him I heard nothing. He smiled faintly. "Then you are blessed." That night thunder rolled across the horizon, and I dreamed of a vast sea filled with the faces of women calling my name. By July, the physicians began their visits. Dr. Pennington, a narrow man with spectacles that pinched his nose, listened to my chest and declared it a nervous disorder common in ladies of refinement. His prescription was laudanum and less excitement. "You must stay indoors, Mrs. Harrington," he said. "Avoid strain. Let your servants handle your business." I obeyed, partly from exhaustion, partly because Marcus had already taken control. He oversaw the cotton pickers, arranged the shipments, even managed the correspondence with Charleston traders. When visitors arrived, he met them at the gate and escorted them to the house. His manners were impeccable, but the plantation was quieter. The laughter and music that once drifted from the quarters had faded. The field hands moved quickly and spoke little. When I asked why, Hannah said only, They don't want him near their babies, ma'am. What nonsense, I said. He has done nothing wrong. Yet I could not ignore what I saw. Chickens dead in their coops, dogs howling through the night, and once a horse that bolted when Marcus merely raised his hand. Still he remained attentive, always gentle. He read aloud from my late husband's agricultural journals, his voice low and measured. Sometimes I imagined the sound alone kept my heart beating. When I grew dizzy, he supported me with careful strength, guiding me to the chair as if I were glass. I should have been afraid. Instead, I felt safe. That was the strangest part of all, the comfort. The more my body failed, the more I trusted him. When my sister Elizabeth wrote urging me to sell the plantation and come live with her in Charleston, I could not bring myself to leave Marcus behind. He understands this place, I wrote back. He understands me. In August, the dreams changed again. They became conversations. In them, Marcus told me that Oak Haven's soil was not dying but sleeping, that if I wanted to save it, I must trust him completely. He promised to heal the land and my heart alike. His hands glowed in those dreams, gold like candlelight. When I woke, the sheets smelled faintly of earth and smoke. One morning I found him outside the house at dawn, standing barefoot in the dew, whispering words into the rising mist. In his hand was a small bowl filled with crushed leaves and ashes. He did not startle when I called his name. He turned slowly, his eyes reflecting the red sunrise. "Making an offering," he said, "for your health." I wanted to ask to whom he offered it, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I nodded, pretending to understand. That day, I fainted in the garden. When I opened my eyes, Marcus was kneeling beside me, pressing something cold to my lips. "Drink," he whispered. I obeyed without question. Afterward, time began to blur. Days folded into nights. Sometimes I would wake and find him sitting by my bedside, humming softly. Other times I thought I saw him in the hallway, even when he was elsewhere. My sense of reality slipped like sand through open fingers. Hannah left the plantation without a word. 2 other servants asked to be sold. Rumors spread that the mistress had fallen under a spell. I ignored them all. What did they know of reason, of gratitude, of loyalty? I told myself I was not ill but transformed, becoming something new, purified through suffering. Marcus said as much one evening when I questioned him. "Illness is only the body learning truth," he said. "When it finishes learning, it rests." "What truth am I learning?" I asked. He looked at me for a long moment before answering. "That not every chain is made of iron." I thought he meant grief. Only later did I understand he meant me. By the end of August, my heartbeat had become erratic, skipping like a clock, losing time. The physicians could find no cause. "Perhaps your constitution is simply delicate," they said. I stopped calling them. Their faces blurred together, their remedies were useless. Every evening Marcus brewed the tea, and though I felt the edge of death in every swallow, I could not refuse him. When I caught my reflection in the mirror, I hardly recognized myself. My eyes had taken on a faint yellow hue, my skin was pale and waxy. Yet beneath the decay, something else stirred, a calm acceptance, as if the part of me that should have feared him had been replaced by quiet devotion. Sometimes I imagined I saw the same light in his eyes, a strange tenderness that made me forget pain. He would take my pulse with steady fingers, murmuring in that low Haitian rhythm, half prayer, half lullaby. I believed he was saving me, but every night when the wind shifted, I heard voices from the quarters whispering my name, and the dogs howled at my window. Somewhere deep in the house, a door would open and close, though no one passed through. And still, I drank. If reason was my shield, then it had already cracked. I told myself science explained the visions, that nerves and heat could conjure miracles of the mind. But reason cannot explain how the air grew colder when he entered the room, or why I began to dream of graves lined in neat rows, each marked by the same name, Harrington. The truth was simple, though I would not say it aloud. I was falling under a spell, but the spell was not his. It was mine. My pride, my logic, my need to believe that knowledge was power. And so I kept drinking the tea, kept trusting the man no one else would touch. Every swallow brought me closer to the truth those amber eyes had held from the beginning. I was not his mistress. I was his lesson. The first warning came in the form of a letter, folded neatly between pages of a ledger I had left on my writing desk. It was not addressed to me directly, which is perhaps why I almost ignored it. The script was firm, masculine, and businesslike. A simple inquiry from the Charleston auction house asking for confirmation of the satisfactory performance of Lot 72, Marcus Beaumont, purchased on March 15th. At first, I smiled. He had indeed performed more than satisfactorily. In 4 months, Oak Haven's yield had improved by nearly a third, the fields orderly, the books balanced, the overseer's whip quiet for the first time in years. I took it as a sign that I had made the right decision. But beneath the letter, on the same stationery, was a note written in a smaller, hurried hand. "Ma'am, if this reaches you, know this. He has been sold 13 times in 7 years, every owner dead within months. Please take care. The auctioneer refuses to put it in record, but I have seen the bills of sale myself." There was no signature, only an ink blot and the faint impression of a trembling hand. I remember staring at it for a long time, half between disbelief and anger. The audacity to send rumors like this to a respectable widow. I crumpled it and tossed it into the fire. Yet that night when I closed my eyes, I dreamed again of those rows of graves bearing my name. Harrington, Harrington, each one marked with a small carved flame. A week later, my sister Elizabeth arrived unannounced. Her carriage rolled up the drive under a hard blue sky, and the sight of it filled me with irritation. I had written to her little in recent months, and I knew she disapproved of my attempts to run the estate alone. When she stepped down, her bonnet askew from the long ride, she embraced me too tightly as though she were greeting the dying. "Oh, Catherine," she whispered, you look dreadful." I forced a smile. "It's the heat and the work. I'm managing." She glanced over my shoulder, her eyes narrowing toward the house where Marcus stood waiting to take her bags. The briefest flicker of recognition passed over her face, followed by unease. "That man," she said quietly. "Is he the one you bought in Charleston?" "Yes. Why?" She shook her head, lips pressed tight. "We'll speak inside." Later in the drawing room, she closed the doors and began to speak with the kind of tremor that comes when fear masquerades as concern. "Catherine, I heard something before I left the city about your purchase. People are talking. They say you bought the cursed one." "Cursed?" I laughed, though my voice came out thin. "Is this another of Charleston's favorite superstitions? You've been listening to gossip from drunk men and hysterical wives." Her hands clenched the fabric of her skirt. "It isn't gossip. I went to the courthouse myself. I saw the records. 13 owners, Catherine. Every one of them dead within the year. The auctioneer refuses to explain why he's sold again and again, but there are notes. Heart failures, accidents, suicides. The same man every time." I wanted to dismiss her, to end the conversation, yet some hidden part of me needed to hear every word. "People die of heart failure every day," I said finally, "especially men who eat and drink the way plantation owners do." "Yes," she said, "but not every owner of the same slave dies the same way. Not everyone leaves him behind, untouched and unpunished." I rose, my head spinning with fatigue. "Enough," You sound like Hannah before she ran off. Do you think I haven't heard these tales? They're meant to cheat me into selling what others covet. She stepped closer. Listen to me. I spoke with a trader who handled one of his early sales. He said the same thing everyone says, that when you look into his eyes long enough, you forget your own good sense. He called them serpent's eyes. Something in me snapped at that. Some mixture of pride and weariness and something else. Something like shame. Do you know what I hear, Elizabeth? I hear envy. You see my plantation thriving again and cannot bear it. You think me too weak to manage it, too foolish to succeed without a man. You came here to find failure, and when you found none, you invented demons to explain it. Her face changed, softening into grief. I came here to save you. Save me from what? From him. The word hung between us like a curse. At that very moment, there was a knock at the door. Marcus entered, carrying a small silver tray. Your tea, ma'am, he said, bowing slightly. Elizabeth's breath caught. She looked at him the way one looks at a fire that might leap from the hearth. You let him serve you? She whispered. I ignored her, taking the cup. The steam rose in pale curls. The scent of mint and almonds filled the air. He waited until I drank, then turned and left as quietly as he had come. When the door closed, Elizabeth burst out, My God, you don't even see it. He's already in you, Catherine. He's killing you slowly, and you thank him for it. I slammed the cup down so hard it shattered, scalding tea splashing across the desk. Enough. I won't have you speak of my servants that way. Leave, or I'll have you escorted out. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then she gathered her shawl, tears bright in her eyes. You'll see when it's too late. I only pray you have time to repent. When she was gone, the silence in the room was unbearable. I could still smell the tea on the floor, sweet and sharp. That night, my heart began to race so violently I thought I might die, right there in bed. I sent for Marcus. He came at once, calm as always, his voice a soothing murmur. You must not let anger overtake you, ma'am. It weakens the heart. He held a cup to my lips. Drink. You'll feel better. And I did. Within minutes, the pounding eased, replaced by a strange tranquility. The memory of Elizabeth's warning faded like smoke. Days passed. The plantation ran smoother than ever, yet I began to feel detached from it, as though watching from behind glass. Marcus handled every decision. The workers obeyed him without question. I saw less and less of Elizabeth's point. How could this man be a monster when he kept everything alive? Still, there were moments when the rational world frayed. Once I saw him standing by the river, his reflection doubled in the water, both images moving slightly out of sync, as if the one in the river belonged to someone else. Another time, I found a book in his quarters filled with strange drawings. Leaves shaped like hearts, roots twisted into knots, human figures surrounded by circles. When I asked about it, he said it was medicine for the earth. In August, another letter arrived. This one from an old trader named Josiah Mitchell, the same man who had warned me at the auction. His handwriting was crooked, his words simple. You will not last the year. Sell him before harvest or prepare your grave beside the others. I tore the letter apart, but the shaking of my hands betrayed me. That evening, as I walked through the corridor, Marcus's voice drifted from the parlor, speaking to one of the field hands in a language I did not know. The tone was soft, almost loving. But when he looked up and saw me, his expression changed. Mrs. Harrington, he said, smiling. We were giving thanks for the rain. I nodded, though the skin along my arms prickled. Later, I asked the girl what he had been saying. She looked terrified and would not answer. The final warning came from within. It was a dream, or perhaps not a dream at all. I was standing in the auction house again, The same wooden floor, the same stifling heat. Marcus was on the block, but this time the audience was empty except for me. "Do you see now?" he asked. His voice echoed, multiplied, surrounding me. "You thought you were buying a man, you bought a mirror." I woke screaming. From that night on, I stopped drinking the tea. For 3 days, I refused it, claiming nausea. On the 4th, the headaches returned with such intensity I thought my skull would split. My heart fluttered wildly, my hands trembled, and still I told myself it was coincidence. When Marcus came to my bedside holding the cup, I tried to refuse again. "Please, ma'am," he said softly. "You'll only make yourself worse." His eyes caught the candlelight, glowing like molten amber. I drank. The pain faded instantly, replaced by a calm so deep it frightened me. I realized then that whatever poison was killing me, it was already part of me. The choice had been made long ago back in Charleston when I raised my hand for the first and only bid. And as the candle burned low, I began to understand the truth Elizabeth had tried to tell me. Every warning ignored is a door willingly opened. The next morning, the auction letter and Mitchell's warning were gone from my desk. Later, I would learn that Marcus had taken them, along with several other papers from my drawers. Records, receipts, correspondence, all quietly burned in the hearth before dawn. When I asked why, he said, "Old paper draws rats, ma'am." I wanted to believe that was all. But deep inside, some part of me finally began to understand that every story whispered in Charleston had been true, and that I was living its 14th chapter. The night I discovered the truth was not marked by thunder or screams, only by stillness, the kind of stillness that hides before something breaks. The moon hung low over Oak Haven, a dull coin swallowed by drifting clouds, and the air pressed down on the house like a held breath. I had been too ill to sleep, my chest tight, my pulse stuttering in the hollows of my throat. I remember thinking that the quiet itself was unnatural. Even the cicadas had gone silent. Marcus had given me tea earlier that evening, but for the first time, I had poured it down the wash basin after he left. The bitterness lingered in the porcelain like guilt. I told myself I only wanted to test a theory, to see if the dreams would fade. But after midnight, when the lanterns in the hallway flickered and a faint humming began somewhere beyond the walls, I knew the dreams had simply learned to breathe without the tea. At first, I thought it was the sound of wind moving through the trees. Then I realized it was rhythmic human, a chant. Low voices carried through the night from the direction of the quarters. I rose from bed, dizzy but compelled, drawn as if by invisible hands. The floorboards creaked beneath my bare feet as I reached for my shawl. Outside, the world was soaked in silver mist, the fields ghostly under moonlight. I followed the sound, past the garden, past the line of cypress trees that bordered the workers' huts. The closer I came, the clearer it grew, a slow pulsing rhythm of words that rose and fell like waves. I could see movement now, shadows circling a small fire that burned low and blue. There were a dozen figures, men and women, their heads bowed, and in the center of the circle stood Marcus. He was bare-chested, the firelight painting his skin in copper and smoke. Around his neck hung strings of bones and shells that caught the light each time he moved. His voice carried above the others, strong, commanding, melodic. In his hands he held a clay bowl filled with something dark and glistening. I could smell it even from where I stood, herbs and ash and the metallic tang of blood. I should have turned back. I should have run to the house and locked every door. But something in me, curiosity, defiance, perhaps the need to know the truth before dying, kept me rooted to the spot. He spoke words I didn't understand, syllables that pulsed with ancient cadence. The others responded in whispers. He lifted the bowl to the sky, then lowered it to the earth, pressing it to the dirt. When he looked up, his eyes flashed gold in the firelight, and then, without turning, he said, "You can come closer, Mrs. Harrington." My heart froze. For a moment, I thought perhaps I was still dreaming. But then he turned fully toward me, his expression calm, not surprised. The others drew back, their chants breaking off into uneasy silence. "I told you not to wander at night," he said gently. "The air is full of things that do not like to be watched." "What is this?" I whispered. My voice shook. "What are you doing?" He smiled slightly, but it was not a kind smile. "Praying. Healing. The land was dying. You asked me to save it." I looked at the bowl. "That's not prayer." He stepped closer, the fire painting his face in flickering gold and shadow. "And what would you call it, ma'am? You believe in your doctors, your ledgers, your reason. I believe in what feeds the earth. We both want life to obey us. The difference is, I never pretend it does so without a price." "What price?" He gestured toward the fire, toward the circle of people watching silently. "The same price it always takes: blood, breath, a life for a life." My stomach turned cold. "You're talking nonsense." He took another step closer, so near that I could see the faint sheen of sweat along his collarbone, smell the herbs that always clung to him. Oleander, mint, and something bitterer beneath. "Is it nonsense that your crops grow again? That the sickness which killed your husband did not touch you until now?" "Did not touch me until now," I repeated, my voice hollow. "You call this living?" His gaze softened, almost pitying. "You were dying long before I came here, dying of pride, dying of the same blindness that killed all the others." I shook my head, but the dizziness made the world sway. "You poisoned them. All of them." His smile vanished. "Poison is a word for those who do not understand medicine." He turned back toward the fire and lifted the bowl again. "My mother was a mambo," he said, his voice taking on the rhythm of story, of sermon. "In Port-au-Prince, before the white men took me. She taught me that every plant carries two faces, the hand that heals and the hand that kills. She said the white world only ever sees one. You take our bodies, our fields, our names, but not our knowledge. That is why your people die when they try to own what cannot be owned." I felt the words like heat against my skin. "You're telling me you've killed them, every one of them, on purpose?" He looked at me, and for the first time I saw no mask of servitude, no gentleness, only calm, absolute certainty. "You think I would spend my life bowing, serving, smiling, and not learn the cost of ownership? Every man or woman who claims another's soul must feed the debt somehow. I simply collect what is owed." The others in the circle watched him with reverence and fear. I realized then that they were not his accomplices. They were witnesses. They had come not to resist him, but to survive him. "You're mad," I said, though my voice barely carried. He stepped forward again, so close that his shadow swallowed mine. "No, ma'am. I am patient." I tried to back away, but the earth seemed to tilt beneath me. The dizziness returned, the familiar burn in my chest. "What did you give me?" I gasped. "Only what you asked for," he said softly. "Rest, relief, a little peace from the ache in your heart." He reached out, brushing his thumb against my wrist where my pulse fluttered weakly. "It's too late now to stop it. But I can make it gentle." I slapped his hand away. "Stay away from me." For a moment, something dark flickered in his eyes, a shadow of disappointment, maybe even sorrow. Then he bowed his head slightly. "As you wish, Mrs. Harrington." I turned and ran. The mist had thickened, and the trees seemed to close around me as I stumbled toward the house. My breath came in ragged bursts, my heart hammering wildly. When I reached the veranda, the lanterns still burned where I had left them, but the house felt different, alive somehow, breathing. The windows reflected not my face, but dozens of faint, flickering shapes behind me. Inside, I locked the door and collapsed against it, trembling. My mind raced with fragments of his words, a life for a life, a hand that heals and kills patient. I thought of William, dead from a sudden heart failure. I thought of the other planters in Charleston, each with their own mysterious end. I thought of the tea, the smell of almonds, the softness of the fog that always followed it. And then, the realization settled in me like a cold stone. I was already dying, one sip at a time. The next morning I awoke on the floor beside the door, my skin slick with sweat. The sun poured through the windows, but its warmth did nothing to chase the chill from my bones. When I tried to stand, my legs buckled. Marcus was there almost instantly, as if he had been waiting outside all night. "You fainted," he said, kneeling beside me. "Let me help you." I wanted to scream at him to leave, to confess, to undo what he had done. But when he touched my arm, the strength drained out of me. His voice filled the air, soft as always. "Drink this," he said. "You'll feel better." I looked at the cup in his hand. The same porcelain, the same pale steam curling upward. My reflection rippled in the surface, distorted. "I saw you," I whispered. "Last night." He didn't flinch. "Then you know the truth." "The truth," I said, tears burning my eyes, "is that you've killed me." He sighed, almost tenderly. "No, ma'am. I've freed you." And then quietly, almost sadly, "They never understand until the end." I didn't drink the tea that morning. I threw it across the floor, where it shattered into pale streaks across the wood. For the first time, Marcus showed emotion, a flash of something like regret, or perhaps anger. "You shouldn't have done that," he said, his tone low and dangerous. "The medicine doesn't forgive neglect." "I want you gone," I said. My voice was weak, but I forced the words out. "Pack your things. You'll leave Oak Haven by nightfall." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded once. "If that is your wish." When he left the room, I sank into the chair, shaking. Relief warred with terror. But as the afternoon shadows lengthened, I began to notice small things. A faint humming from the walls, the creak of floorboards when no one walked. By dusk, I smelled the herbs burning again. The house was no longer mine. That night, I locked the door to my room. Yet around midnight, I woke to a whisper. His voice, soft, coaxing, speaking words I didn't understand. My limbs felt heavy, my pulse thick and slow. I realized too late that whatever poison he had been giving me was no longer confined to the tea. It was in the air, the very dust of the house. Through half-lidded eyes, I saw him standing at the foot of the bed, a candle in his hand. The flame barely touched his face. "You can't banish what you've already invited," he said quietly. "Oak Haven chose its sacrifice when you raised your hand in Charleston." Then the candle went out, and the darkness rushed in. That was the night I stopped believing in reason. The night I understood that death had been living inside my veins for months, wearing the gentle face of the man I had trusted most. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the fear and betrayal, another thought began to take root, a terrible, shameful understanding. Part of me still wanted him to stay. By the time September's heat began to sink into the land, the world had shrunk to the boundaries of my bedroom. I had once ruled Oak Haven's halls like a queen, giving orders from morning until the lamps were lit. Now I could barely climb from bed without help. My pulse stumbled through my chest like a broken clock. My skin itched with a restless burning that no salve could calm. Outside my window, the fields looked alive again, cotton glowing white under the sun, workers bending and rising in rhythm. But all of it belonged to him now. Marcus. He did not leave as I had commanded that night after the ritual. He did not even pretend to. By morning, I found him standing in the doorway with a basin of cool water and that same calm expression he always wore. "I couldn't abandon you in your condition, ma'am," he said quietly. "The fever will pass, but you must let me tend to you." And I, weak as a child, said nothing. I let him wash my hands, place a damp cloth on my forehead. He moved with such care, such unhurried grace, that the anger I had nursed through the night began to wither under its own weight. It was easier to surrender to his presence than to fight it. Perhaps it was the poison's doing. Perhaps it was loneliness. Either way, by the second day, I had stopped trying to send him away. The tea returned too. It appeared again on my bedside table, steaming softly, its scent drifting through the room. I told myself I wouldn't touch it, but after hours of trembling nausea and that unbearable pounding in my head, I gave in. The first sip brought the same slow bloom of warmth in my chest, the same artificial calm. My thoughts blurred into a pleasant haze. He sat near the window, reading aloud from one of William's ledgers, his voice low and steady. By the time I drifted to sleep, the world no longer felt cruel. It became a routine of its own, pain and relief, suspicion and surrender. I told myself I could stop at any time, that I was not truly his captive. That lie comforted me. The mind is clever in how it defends its own destruction. Each morning he asked the same question. "Did you sleep well?" And I answered, "Yes." The words became a charm between us, meaningless and necessary. Yet the evidence of what he was doing surrounded me. The mirror showed my face growing thinner each day, skin stretched pale over sharp bones. My heartbeat thudded unevenly. Sometimes, when I pressed my fingers to my wrist, it vanished entirely for a second, leaving a hollow silence beneath my skin. My mouth tasted constantly of metal. I knew these were not the symptoms of fever or nerves. I knew they were symptoms of poison. But the truth was unbearable, so I built new explanations each day. Perhaps the tea merely disguised another illness. Perhaps Marcus, despite his strange rituals, truly meant to help me. The human mind can forgive almost anything if the alternative is terror. He began keeping detailed notes of my condition, written in that beautiful, deliberate hand of his. I once found them scattered across the writing desk. Each page listed the same headings: dosage, response, behavior. Under response, I saw words that chilled me: pulse steady, mind docile, resistance decreasing. I tore the papers into pieces and threw them into the hearth, but when I turned around, he was standing in the doorway, watching me with quiet amusement. "Fire won't destroy what already lives in the body," he said. I wanted to strike him, to scream, but my strength failed before I could rise. He crossed the room, collected the torn pieces from the ashes, and placed them neatly back on the desk. "You should rest now," he said. "The body listens when it is calm." That night I dreamed of the auction again. But this time, I wasn't in the audience. I was the one standing on the block, wrists bound, the crowd below whispering. Marcus was the auctioneer, his hammer raised high. 500, he called, going once, going twice. When I woke, the taste of blood was in my mouth. The days blurred. I measured time not by sun or moon, but by the rhythm of Marcus's voice and the shifting color of the light through the curtains. Sometimes he spoke of Haiti, of mountains where the wind carried songs older than memory, of mothers who taught their sons to read the language of leaves. Other times he said nothing at all, just watched me with those amber eyes that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light. I tried to question him once, during one of my clearer moments. "Why me?" I whispered. "Why not kill me quickly as you did the others?" He looked up from the book he was pretending to read. "Because you're different." "How?" "You don't believe in anything. That makes you the most faithful of all." I didn't understand, and he didn't explain. He only refilled my cup. By late September, the plantation began to whisper. Servants avoided the main house entirely. I heard footsteps on the porch at night, people coming to leave offerings, maybe warnings, before fleeing again into the dark. Once I found a small bundle of salt and dried leaves on the threshold. When I showed it to Marcus, he smiled. They think it will keep me away. They don't understand that I'm already inside. Even Elizabeth wrote again. Her letter arrived wrinkled and stained from travel, filled with frantic words. You must leave that house. Sell everything. Come to Charleston. They say he carries death in his hands. I tried to reply, but my hand shook too violently to hold the pen. I folded her letter into my Bible and never wrote back. My body betrayed me in new ways each week. My vision blurred around the edges. Sometimes the furniture seemed to breathe. The doctors came and went, diagnosing everything except the truth. A weak heart, they said. Too much grief. Too little air. One even prescribed more laudanum, which Marcus accepted on my behalf. I never saw the bottle again, and yet through all of it I could not hate him. I wanted to. God knows I wanted to. But each time he entered the room, a strange calm descended. His presence quieted the panic like a hand smoothing water. When he touched my wrist to take my pulse, my body leaned toward him instead of away. I began to crave the sound of his footsteps, the faint rustle of his clothing as he moved. I told myself it was gratitude, it was dependence, it was love, it was all of those and none. I think that was his real art, not the poison, not the herbs, but the way he taught you to long for your own undoing. One afternoon, the pain in my chest became unbearable. I called for him, half sobbing. He came at once, kneeling beside me. It's all right, he murmured. It's only your heart learning to let go. I don't want to die, I whispered. You already did, he said softly. Back in Charleston when you chose me. He held a cup to my lips again. I should have refused, but the fear of pain outweighed the fear of death. I drank. The world softened. The ceiling rippled like water. Through the haze I heard him humming, a slow, haunting melody that might have been a lullaby or a prayer. The words were foreign, but the sound sank into me until my body stopped trembling. That was how he kept me alive, feeding me just enough poison to keep me tethered, just enough comfort to make me thank him for it. In moments of clarity, I tried to plan escape. Once I asked one of the younger servants, a boy named Samuel, to fetch a carriage. Tell no one, I whispered. I'll pay you myself. He nodded, wide-eyed, but the next morning he was gone. Marcus said the boy had run off toward Savannah. I didn't ask questions. Each failed attempt drained the last scraps of will from me. I began to think of my body as something separate, a vessel he tended like the fields, pruning and watering until harvest. Sometimes, when I drifted between waking and sleep, I imagined his voice in my head whispering, "You are soil. I am the seed." By late September, even the doctors stopped coming. Word spread that the widow of Oak Haven was beyond saving. Elizabeth wrote once more, begging to visit, but Marcus told her I was too fragile for company. I don't know whether she believed him. The days that followed blurred into a fevered twilight. My reflection grew ghostly, the skin beneath my eyes darkened to bruises. Yet my mind, what remained of it, clung to reason, the last thread of my former self. I began to record what I could still recall, the timing of my symptoms, the taste of the tea, the subtle changes in his behavior. Each note was an act of defiance, a reminder that I was still capable of thought. But even those pages betrayed me. When I woke one morning, they were gone, replaced by a single line written in his hand. "The one who names the poison becomes it." I tore the page and burned it, though the words seemed to linger in the smoke. By the end of the month, the servants whispered that I had lost my mind. Perhaps I had. I no longer knew what belonged to dreams and what to waking life. Sometimes in the corners of the room I saw the faces of the dead, William, the others from Charleston watching in silence, and Marcus always near, his presence filling every space like air. The poison had done its work. My heart obeyed him more faithfully than it ever had God. I think that was the cruelest irony of all. I had spent my life believing reason could protect me, that the mind could master fear. But reason does not fight what it cannot see. It only explains it away until there is nothing left but surrender. And by then, surrender was all I had left to give. The storm began just after dusk, though it had been threatening all day. Thick metallic air pressing down on Oak Haven until even the birds grew silent. I remember sitting in the chair by the window, my shawl pulled tight around shoulders that had grown fragile as twigs. The clouds were black, swollen, waiting to burst. And when they finally did, the first crack of thunder sounded like the sky itself splitting open to watch me die. Marcus moved through the house with his usual calm, lighting lamps, securing shutters, his shadow stretched across the walls. He looked like the storm's reflection, controlled, deliberate, unstoppable. "Stay in your room, ma'am," he said softly. "The wind will be strong tonight." But I could not sit still. My heart thudded unevenly, each beat sharp and painful, like something knocking from the inside, trying to escape. I could hear him humming somewhere downstairs, that same low rhythm I had come to dread and crave all at once. The sound wound through the corridors, soft as a spell, steady as the rain beginning to fall. Lightning flashed across the window, illuminating the trees bending under the gale. In the instant of white light, I saw something that made my blood freeze. Shapes moving near the quarters, figures huddled in the open as if praying. I knew then that the storm had not come by chance. It was here for me. Then, another sound. Hooves on the road, a carriage. It stopped at the gates, the wheels grinding against gravel. Moments later, through the roaring of the wind, came a woman's voice shouting my name. "Catherine! Elizabeth!" I don't know how she made it through that storm or why she had come then after months of silence. But I felt something like relief flood through me, sharp and fleeting. She was here. She had not given up on me after all. I heard the front doors slam open. The storm came with her, rain, wind, the smell of wet earth. Her footsteps echoed up the staircase. "Catherine, where are you?" I tried to answer, but my voice was too faint. I rose from the chair, gripping the post of the bed for support just as the door burst open. Elizabeth stood there, soaked through, her face pale and wild with fear. "My God," she gasped. "What has he done to you?" I must have looked like a ghost, my hair limp, my skin colorless, my eyes ringed in shadow. "He didn't do this," I whispered. "It's only sickness." She crossed the room in 3 strides, taking my hands in hers. "Don't lie to me. I've spoken with people, traders, doctors, even that old man Mitchell. They all said the same thing. He's killed every person who's ever owned him, and you're next unless you leave this house tonight." "Leave?" I laughed, though it came out cracked and weak. "You don't understand. I can't. He won't let me." Her eyes widened. "Then we'll make him." A sound came from the hall, a soft creak, deliberate, patient. Elizabeth turned toward it, her body tensing. "He's here," she whispered. Marcus's voice drifted through the doorway. "I see we have a guest." He stepped into the room calm as ever, though his clothes were wet from the storm. He carried no weapon, only a small brass lamp that threw trembling shadows across his face. "Good evening, Miss Peyton," he said, bowing slightly. "I wish you hadn't come. The roads are dangerous." "Don't you dare speak to me," Elizabeth snapped. "I know what you are." He smiled faintly. "Do you?" Lightning split the sky behind him, and for an instant his silhouette burned white against the doorway, tall and still, the flame of the lamp flickering in his amber eyes. "Get away from her," Elizabeth said, stepping between us. "Catherine, go! Now!" I wanted to move, but my legs trembled, my heart lurched violently in my chest. "Please," I whispered, "don't anger him." "Anger him?" She turned to me, disbelief written across her face. "You're defending him? He's poisoning you." Marcus's voice was almost tender. "She knows." Elizabeth spun on him. "Then you admit it." "I admit," he said, taking a step forward, "that some debts cannot be settled without pain. Your sister bought more than a man that day. She bought every life taken to make her comfort possible." "Stop it," I begged. "Please stop." But neither of them heard me. The wind howled through the cracks of the window. The rain lashed the shutters. Elizabeth's fury burned bright as lightning. "You're a murderer." Marcus tilted his head. "And you? How many have you murdered with your silence, with your fine dresses and sugar and cotton? The poison I use merely makes visible what has always been here." She reached for the pistol tucked into her coat pocket. "Then I'll rid the world of your justice." The air seemed to shatter. Before she could raise the weapon, the lamp in Marcus's hand flared, then went out. The room plunged into darkness, broken only by lightning's pulse. I heard the pistol fire, a single deafening crack, and smelled gunpowder. When the flash faded, Marcus still stood, untouched. Elizabeth staggered, the gun falling from her trembling hands. The bullet had struck the mirror behind him. The glass splintered, reflecting 1,000 fragments of flame and rain. He crossed the room in 2 strides and took her wrist, not cruelly, but with a strength that silenced her. "I told you not to come," he murmured. She struggled, striking at him, but he held her easily. "Let her go," I cried. He looked at me then, and something in his expression made my breath catch. Regret, perhaps, or sorrow. "I cannot," he said. "You invited me here, and the door does not close until the offering is complete." He released her wrist, and she stumbled backward. For a heartbeat, I thought he meant to kill her, but instead he turned to me. "Mrs. Harrington," he said, his tone almost formal, "it is time." Lightning illuminated his face. The mask of gentleness was gone. He looked ancient, inhuman, a creature carved from calm and fury both. "You've carried the sickness long enough. Let it rest." I backed away until my knees hit the bed. "You said you wanted to free me," I whispered. "I do." He stepped closer. Elizabeth lunged forward, snatching a candlestick from the dresser, swinging it toward him. It struck his shoulder hard enough to knock him sideways, but he did not cry out. The lamp fell from his hand and shattered. Flames licked across the spilled oil on the floor. The storm roared louder, as if the sky itself had been waiting for fire. Marcus straightened slowly, his eyes fixed on me. "Every life I've taken," he said, "was a seed. You are the last." The flames spread, catching the edge of the curtains. Elizabeth grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the door. "Come on, before it's too late." But I couldn't move. My feet felt rooted to the floor. The heat pressed against my skin, smoke curled around us. Marcus reached into the pocket of his coat and drew out something small, a bundle of cloth bound with red thread. He held it in his palm and whispered words that made the air pulse. The bundle began to smolder, releasing a sharp, sweet scent. My vision swam. The pounding in my chest turned to a deep, aching rhythm that matched the storm outside. "Stop it!" Elizabeth shouted. She kicked the burning cloth from his hand and stamped on it. He turned toward her, fury flashing across his face for the first time. The wind exploded through the shattered window, sending glass and rain across the room. The candlelight flickered wildly, and in that chaos I saw something, shapes twisting in the smoke, faces half-formed, reaching from the air itself. Whether spirits or hallucinations, I cannot say. They whispered in voices like water running backward. Elizabeth screamed. The curtains caught fully now, flames climbing high. Marcus stood in the center of it all, his figure framed in fire. "Do you see?" he called over the roar. "This is what you built, the world that feeds on bodies and calls it civilization." He raised his hands to the ceiling as if commanding the storm. The wind answered. A blast of thunder rattled the floorboards, and the door behind us slammed shut. Elizabeth pulled me against her, coughing from the smoke. "We have to jump," she gasped, "through the window." I hesitated only a moment before nodding. Together we staggered toward the shattered glass. Outside, rain poured in sheets. The drop was only 6 feet to the veranda roof below. "Go first," I whispered. She climbed onto the sill, turning back once to look at me. "Come after me." Then she leapt. I saw her land hard on the wet roof roll and disappear from view. Behind me, Marcus spoke again, softer now. "There's nowhere to run, ma'am. The poison's done its work. The rest is mercy." I turned to face him. The firelight flickered across his face, and for a moment I thought I saw the boy he must have been before all of this. A child watching his mother burn under a foreign flag, learning that knowledge can be sharper than any blade. I said the only truth left to me. "You win." He shook his head. "No one wins. The earth just remembers." Then the ceiling groaned. Flames licked across the beams. The roof above us began to collapse. I climbed onto the window ledge, the rain slashing my face. Below, I saw Elizabeth struggling to her feet in the mud, shouting for me. Marcus took one step toward me through the smoke. "You could stay," he said. "You'd suffer less." I looked down at him, at the man I had bought, the man who had unmade me, the man whose calm voice still echoed in my dreams and whispered, "I already have." Then I jumped. The world shattered around me. I landed on the wet earth hard enough to knock the breath from my lungs. Elizabeth dragged me away from the falling debris. Behind us, Oak Haven's upper windows erupted in fire. The storm tore through the house, feeding the flames instead of drowning them. We collapsed under the cypress trees, soaked, trembling, watching as the house burned. Through the smoke and rain, I saw him one last time. Marcus, standing in the doorway, his figure illuminated against the inferno. He did not move, did not call out. He simply watched the flames rise as if greeting an old friend. Lightning struck the roof. The sound split the night in two. The walls caved inward, swallowing him whole. The rain kept falling. The fire hissed and sputtered but would not die until dawn. When the first light of morning touched the ruins, all that remained of Marcus Beaumont was ash scattered across the wet ground, and the faint smell of almond and mint drifting through the smoke. But even as Elizabeth wept beside me, I knew he was not truly gone, because the moment I closed my eyes, I could still hear his voice inside my head, calm and unhurried, whispering, "Every seed finds its soil." And in that whisper I understood the terrible truth. Whatever he had planted in me, it was still growing. Morning came gray and soundless, the kind of morning after a storm when even the birds do not yet dare to sing. A pale mist hung over what remained of Oak Haven, softening the edges of destruction. The once white columns of the great house stood cracked and blackened, rising out of the smoke like ribs of some dead giant. The roof had caved in entirely, only the brick chimneys jutted skyward, exhaling thin streams of ash. All around, the ground steamed where the rain met the smoldering embers. Elizabeth and I had spent the night crouched beneath the cypress trees, wrapped in torn blankets taken from the overseer's cabin. Neither of us had slept. Each time my eyes closed, I saw Marcus standing in that doorway again. Tall, calm, flame behind, him. His gaze fixed not on the fire, but on me. I kept expecting him to step out of the smoke, to appear walking across the ruined field as if death were only another mask he could remove at will. When the first wagon from town arrived, driven by neighbors who had seen the fire from miles away, they found us sitting side by side in the mud, our faces streaked with soot. One of the men called out, "Mrs. Harrington, are you hurt?" I could not answer. Elizabeth spoke for both of us. "She's alive," she said, "but she won't speak." The men spread across the property, stamping out small pockets of flame, hauling water from the well. By mid-morning, only smoke and silence remained. They carried me into what was left of the carriage house and wrapped a shawl around my shoulders. A doctor came, the same one who had once declared my illness a matter of female nerves. He examined my pulse, muttering about exhaustion and shock. When he asked what had happened, I simply whispered, "Lightning." It was easier than the truth. In the days that followed, rumors spread through the countryside faster than the fire itself. Some said the widow of Oak Haven had gone mad and burned her own house in a fit of hysteria. Others swore they'd seen a tall, light-skinned man walking unharmed through the flames, disappearing into the woods. The enslaved workers whispered that Obeah had taken its payment at last. And the traders in Charleston, ever practical, recorded the property loss in their ledgers and moved on to the next auction. Elizabeth stayed with me through the first week. She slept on a cot near the door, rising at dawn to handle the endless stream of visitors, the sheriff, the lawyer, the priest, the curious neighbors who wanted to see the ruins for themselves. I remember little of those days beyond fragments, the smell of wet ash, the creak of wagon wheels leaving ruts in the softened earth, the way Elizabeth's voice grew sharper each time someone hinted that Marcus's death had been my fault. One night, as we sat by the small fire she had built outside the carriage house, she finally spoke the question I had been avoiding. Was it true, what he said, about the poison? I looked into the flames, watching them tremble in the draft. "Yes," I said at last. "And no." She frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means he used what I gave him," I said. "My trust, my ignorance. He didn't just poison my body, he made me see what I refused to see, that every comfort here was bought with someone else's suffering." Elizabeth shook her head fiercely. "That's not the same as guilt, Catherine. You didn't choose slavery. You were born into it." "Maybe," I said, "but I lived off it. I told myself I was better than others because I treated people kindly, because I learned their names. But kindness is only cruelty with manners." She said nothing after that. The fire cracked once, sending a plume of sparks into the night air. Somewhere far off, an owl called. In the morning, she announced she was returning to Charleston to settle the legal matters. "You'll come with me," she said firmly. "You can't stay here." But I could not leave yet. I needed to see what he had left behind. When the men cleared the ruins, I searched the wreckage myself. The fire had consumed nearly everything. Yet in what had been my bedroom, I found one surviving object. A small iron box, blackened but intact, buried beneath a fallen beam. Inside lay a bundle wrapped in scorched linen. I unwrapped it carefully and found what looked like a collection of simple things. A lock of hair tied with red thread, a small clay figurine, and a folded scrap of parchment. The parchment held a single sentence written in his elegant hand. "That which is planted in darkness will bloom again in those who remember." I don't know whether it was meant as a warning or a promise. I burned the lock of hair that same evening, scattering the ashes into the river. But I kept the figurine. Its face was smooth and expressionless, its body marked with faint symbols I couldn't decipher. Holding it in my palm, I felt neither fear nor relief, only a quiet certainty that his story was not finished. 2 weeks later, Elizabeth returned with the lawyer. The estate, he said, was ruined. The fire had destroyed not only the house but the ledgers, the deeds, the evidence of debt and ownership. The bank would claim what remained of the land. "You'll need to sell the property," he concluded. "There's no saving it." I signed the papers without protest. The plantation that had once defined my life ceased to exist with a stroke of ink. That night I walked one last time through the fields. The cotton plants had survived the fire, their white blooms glowing ghost pale beneath the moonlight. The air smelled faintly of smoke and salt. Somewhere beyond the trees the river murmured. I thought of Marcus again. His voice, his hands, the strange tenderness in his cruelty. I wondered whether he had truly died or whether the earth had simply reclaimed him, the way it does all things born of it. A part of me believed he was still here, scattered through the soil, the ash, the air I breathed. Maybe that was his victory, to become inseparable from the land itself, to turn every whisper of wind into a reminder. Elizabeth left for Charleston the next morning, promising to send for me once she found a suitable house. I told her I would follow soon. But after she rode away, I packed a small satchel, took the figurine, and walked south toward the coast. I had no clear destination, only the need to keep moving, to escape the boundaries of the life that had burned behind me. Along the road, I passed the ruins of other plantations, smaller ones abandoned after the owner's debts grew too great. Some stood silent and empty. Others still held people who looked at me with guarded eyes as I passed. In each face I saw echoes of Marcus, strength disguised as stillness, knowledge carried like a hidden weapon. For 3 days I walked until the smell of salt thickened in the air and the horizon widened into blue. I reached the sea at sunset, the waves stained gold and crimson. I sat on the sand until darkness came, listening to the tide. The rhythmic pull of the water reminded me of his chanting, the rise and fall of words I had never understood. I opened the small figurine box once more and buried it in the wet sand. The tide crept forward, covering it inch by inch until it disappeared completely. "Let him rest," I whispered. But as the water withdrew, something else surfaced in its place. A single oleander blossom, pale pink, drifting on the foam. I stared at it for a long time, knowing there were no oleander trees anywhere near the beach. I didn't touch it. When I finally turned away from the sea, dawn was beginning to color the horizon. I felt lighter, yet not free. Freedom, I realized, was not escape. It was knowledge, the kind that cannot be buried or burned. Marcus had given me that, though the price had been everything else. I walked inland again toward the road that would eventually lead to Charleston. Each step carried me farther from Oak Haven, yet its ghosts followed in the rhythm of my heartbeat. Sometimes when the wind shifted, I thought I heard his voice again, whispering words I could almost translate. "Remember, remember." By the time I reached the city, I no longer introduced myself as Mrs. Harrington. I signed my name simply as Catherine, widow, without property or home. People in Charleston looked at me with curiosity, whispering that I was the woman whose plantation had burned, the one who had lived with the cursed slave. They asked questions I never answered. At night I dreamed of him, always standing at the edge of the firelight, his eyes catching the glow, his voice calm. In the dreams, he never spoke of vengeance or forgiveness, only of patience. "The soil never forgets," he would say. And each time I woke, I found the scent of oleander lingering in the room, faint but undeniable. I began writing again, not ledgers or accounts, but what I remembered, the truth of those months, the sickness, the power, the lies. Words were the only way left to make sense of what had happened. I filled notebook after notebook, though I never showed them to anyone. Perhaps someday I thought someone would read them and understand that the story of Marcus Beaumont was not only about death, but about the knowledge buried beneath centuries of denial. Years passed, The war came and went. Charleston changed hands, burned, rebuilt. I lived quietly near the harbor, earning a small living as a seamstress. No one recognized the faded widow with trembling hands as the mistress of Oak Haven. That anonymity became its own kind of peace. Yet even in old age, when my hair turned white and my body grew frail, I could still feel him near me on nights when the wind rose. Sometimes I caught myself preparing tea, boiling water, reaching for the porcelain cup, only to freeze, remembering. Then I would pour it away, watching the steam curl upward like a ghost released. If anyone ever asked about the fire, I told them lightning struck the roof. If they asked about Marcus, I said he died in the storm. Both were true enough. But inside, I knew the story was larger, that he had burned away more than a house, that he had forced the earth to speak through destruction, demanding the reckoning we had all postponed. Now, as I write these final lines by the light of a small candle, I feel the same heaviness in my chest that I felt that first night after I bought him, the warning my body gave before the poison began its work. Perhaps it has never truly left me. Perhaps that was his last gift, to ensure that I could never again forget the price of ownership, the weight of ignorance, the thin line between healer and killer. Outside my window, thunder murmurs far out at sea. Rain is coming again. I think I will let it. If the wind carries this story farther than my own voice, let whoever reads it understand this much. The most dangerous kind of power is not hatred or violence. It is knowledge wrapped in gentleness, waiting for someone foolish enough to believe it harmless. And sometimes, even after fire and ash and years of silence, the soil remembers the name of the one who taught it to speak. The year is 1881 as I set down these words. My hands tremble from age, yet my memory, cursed blessing that it is, remains sharp enough to conjure every scent, every shadow, every heartbeat that belonged to those days. It has been more than 30 years since the fire consumed Oak Haven, and the name Catherine Harrington was reduced to ash with it. Yet even now, when the wind turns warm and damp from the Carolina coast, I can still smell oleander, the sweet, bitter fragrance that once lived in my blood. The world has changed, or so they tell me. The war that came and ended slavery did not end the sickness that allowed it. Men still measure worth by ownership, still invent ways to disguise cruelty as order. I see it in the faces that pass my small window here in Charleston. The tired eyes of men who fought for both sides, the broken gait of the newly freed who have learned that freedom is not a gate that opens once, but a field that must be walked forever. And I, the widow who once thought herself enlightened, have become a ghost among them. For years after the fire, I kept to myself, living quietly in the narrow house near the harbor. Elizabeth visited often in those first years, insisting I come to church, that I meet respectable widowers, that I let the past fade. You must forgive yourself, she would say. But I could not. Forgiveness felt like pretending that what happened was only a personal tragedy, when I knew it was part of something far older, deeper, a sickness in the soil itself. Sometimes she brought her children to see me. They would play on the small patch of grass behind the house, and I would watch them through the window, thinking of the children who had once run through Oak Haven's fields, the enslaved ones whose names I never learned, whose laughter had been silenced by the same system that once clothed me in silk and lace. I never remarried. I never returned to that part of the country where the plantation once stood. The land was divided after the war, sold in parcels to new owners who plowed over the ashes and planted cotton again, because men cannot resist the hunger of profit even when the ground still smolders from sin. Yet word reached me now and then, reports in the paper, whispers among old neighbors. Strange things, they said, began to happen on that soil. Livestock born still, crops that thrived early and then died suddenly, their roots black as coal. Workers who complained of seeing a tall man walking the fields at dusk, eyes glowing like amber in the fading light. One owner claimed that a child had fallen ill after drinking from the well and muttered in his fever about the man in the smoke. They called it Cursed Land, though none could agree why. I told no one what I knew. Perhaps silence was cowardice, or perhaps it was mercy. The truth, that Marcus Beaumont's death did not end his presence, was a truth the world was not ready to hear. He had not been a mere man, nor a ghost, nor a saint. He was something larger, the embodiment of knowledge twisted by bondage and sharpened by pain. To call him monster or hero would be to misunderstand him entirely. He was the earth remembering what had been done to it, the slow revenge of buried wisdom resurfacing when arrogance forgets its lessons. Yet there are nights, even now, when I wake gasping from dreams that feel too vivid to be dreams. I see the old house burning again, but this time the flames do not consume. It rebuilds. The columns rise from ash, the roof reforms, and through the glowing doorway he steps once more, untouched, unaged. He walks toward me and kneels beside my bed, his voice calm, the same as it ever was. "You see, ma'am," he says softly, "the body may die, but the lesson endures. You tended me with your fear. The world tends me still." I always wake before he reaches for me. The candle by my bedside still burns, though I do not remember lighting it. The room smells faintly of herbs, and sometimes I find a single pink oleander petal resting on the floorboards. There are rational explanations, of course. The mind invents signs to give shape to guilt. The old garden outside might still host an oleander tree, though I never planted one. But some part of me, the part that survived fire and poison and years of silence, knows better. I have kept his figurine all this time. It sits on my writing desk, small enough to fit in my palm. Its features have faded with handling, but the faint symbols remain etched along its back. Sometimes when I touch them, I swear I feel warmth, as though it remembers the shape of his hands. I once considered destroying it, throwing it into the harbor the way I did his lock of hair, but each time I try, a strange dread stops me. I fear that if I cast it away, something far worse than memory will return to claim it. So I keep it near. Not as devotion, but as warning. People in Charleston sometimes come to me now asking for stories. They say I was once a mistress of great land and fortune, that I knew the old world before it burned. The young ones, students, reformers, journalists, want me to describe the past in tidy sentences, to fit my life into the pattern of progress they believe history follows. Tell us how it ended, they say. But I never tell them about Marcus. Instead, I tell them the truth that is safe to say, that every empire of cruelty collapses not through justice, but through rot. That the earth itself turns against those who believe it can be owned. That the wages of ignorance are always paid, though sometimes in currencies the living do not recognize. One man, a northern scholar with soft hands and the eager eyes of a believer, once pressed me for details. "Surely, Mrs. Harrington, you exaggerate," he said. "Poison, curses, voices in the wind, those are metaphors, are they not?" I smiled faintly and asked him if he had ever seen a man die slowly, his heart failing while he still smiled in gratitude to the one who killed him. He said no. I told him that until he had, he should not speak of metaphors. He did not return. Elizabeth died 5 years ago, peaceful in her sleep. Before her passing, she wrote to me one last time. In her letter, she said she had come to believe that Marcus's story was not just horror, but revelation. "Perhaps he was the reckoning," she wrote, "the one thing powerful enough to force the proud to see what they refuse to see." I wanted to argue, but she was right. Marcus was both punishment and teacher. The poison he used was only a language, the only one his world could not silence. As I write this, the city outside hums with the noise of progress. Rail lines, steamships, new buildings rising where old ones crumble. Yet beneath it all, I sense the same pulse that once throbbed through Oak Haven's soil. The heartbeat of something older, wiser, waiting. I have come to think that he was never truly one man but part of a continuum. The knowledge passed down through generations who understood the earth in ways we never did. His death did not end that lineage. It simply changed its form. Sometimes I see it in the eyes of the dock workers hauling crates at dawn, in the careful grace of the women selling herbs at the market, their bundles tied with red thread just like his. The world calls it coincidence. I call it continuity. What remains of me is fading. My heart, always fragile since that year, has begun its final slow stutter. Each night I feel it pause a little longer, as though considering whether to keep going. I am not afraid. I've lived with death too long to fear it now. But I do wonder what will come next. Whether I will meet him again, not as master and slave, not as poisoner and victim, but as two souls bound by knowledge neither could escape. If I do, I will not curse him. I will ask only one question. Was it worth it? And I think he will answer with that same calm voice. It had to be. Perhaps he will take my hand and lead me through the smoke into the field beyond, where the soil hums with life and memory. Perhaps he will show me how to listen, truly listen to the voices that rise from beneath the ground, the voices of those who tilled and suffered and resisted. Maybe that is what paradise means for people like us. Not peace, but understanding. Until then, I sit by my window and watch the rain fall. Each drop darkens the earth below, and I imagine the soil drinking deeply, remembering. They say the past is gone. I know better. The past grows roots, and those roots wait patiently for the next fool to walk barefoot over them, thinking the ground harmless. Then the poison begins again, slow, sweet, invisible. As for me, I will die quietly with ink-stained fingers and the faint smell of oleander in the air. When they find me, they will say the old widow simply drifted away in her sleep. But perhaps if they listen closely, they will hear a whisper in the room, a low hum like chanting, ancient and steady, promising that knowledge never dies. And when they carry my body to the churchyard, the wind will shift just for a moment. Someone will swear they saw a tall figure standing among the graves, his eyes catching the last light of the setting sun, his expression neither cruel nor kind. Then he will vanish, leaving behind nothing but the echo of his voice and the scent of bitter flowers. Because in the end, this was never a story about vengeance. It was about memory, the kind that refuses to stay buried. And as the earth closes over me, I understand at last what Marcus meant on that first night when he said, "The land will remember." It always does. It always will.